So here's some more examples on rationalizing the denominator. And what we're going to look at for the first question is we're going to see if we can simplify either the top radical or the bottom radical. With the square root of 50, we can take out a perfect square value of 25, and that's going to be the greatest perfect square value I can take out. So I'm going to take out the square root of 25 times the square root of 2. And then I also can simplify the square root of 8. The greatest perfect square value I can take out is 4. So it's going to be the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. What that's going to do is that's going to simplify this to 5 square root 2 over 2 square root 2, because the square root of 25 is 5. You keep the square root of 2 underneath the radical. Square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 2. You're going to keep that underneath the radical. Now, with rationalizing the denominator, you cannot have a radical in the denominator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply by the square root of 2 on the top and the bottom. That's going to make it so that it's 5. So I'm going to do 2 times 2 is 4. So square root of 4 over 2 square root 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. I'm then going to do, this would be 5 times 2 over 2 times 2. So that's going to be 10 over 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. I'm then going to simplify, so this would be 5 over 2. That's going to be my final answer. Now with this next one, I'm going to see if I can simplify this radical, and I can't. So I'm going to see if I can simplify 24, and I can. So I'm going to leave this one the same. I'm going to put this 10. The greatest perfect square value we can take out is 4. So that's going to be the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. That's going to allow me to be left with 6 square root 7 over, this is going to be 10 times 2 times the square root of 6. That's going to simplify to 6 square root 7 over 20 square root 6. I can't have a radical in the bottom, so I'm going to multiply the top by the square root of 6 and also the bottom, so the numerator and the denominator. This is going to end up being 6 square root 7 times 6 is 42 over, this is going to be 20 square root 36, because 6 times 6 is 36. That is going to make this 6 square root 42 over, this would be 20 times 6. I'm then going to take that and I'm going to make it 6 square root 42 over 120, because 20 times 6 is 120. I'm then going to ask myself if I can simplify 6 and 120, and I can. So that's going to be left with the square root of 42 over, and then that's going to be 20, because they both have 6 in common. I cannot simplify the square root of 42, so I'm going to leave it. So my final answer is square root 42 over 20. My next example is the square root of 48 divided by 6. My first thing that I have to see is if I can simplify the inside. So does 48 and 6, do they have anything in common? It's basically saying 48 divided by 6. That becomes 8. So I'm left with the square root of 8. I have to ask myself if I can simplify the square root of 8, and I can. So I can take the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. This is the greatest perfect square value I can take out. So my final answer is actually going to be 2 square root 2. Now I'm going to do the same thing over here, and I'm going to say, okay, does 12 and 60 have anything in common? They do, so it ends up being that it would be the square root of 1/5. Now that I have the square root of 1/5, I'm going to take the square root of 1 over the square root of 5. Square root of 1 just becomes 1, so it's going to be 1 square root 5. I cannot leave it with a radical in the denominator, so I'm going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the square root of 5. That leaves me with, that would be 1 square root of 5, so I'm just going to write square root of 5 over 5 times 5 is the square root of 25. Square root of 5 I can keep. Square root of 25 I can simplify, so it would be the square root of 5 over 5, and that would be my final answer. My next question, I'm going to see if I can simplify this radical, which I can, so that would be 3 over 6 times the square root of 5. I can't simplify that, so I'm going to leave it. I can't have a radical in the denominator, so I'm going to multiply by the radical on the top and the bottom. So I get 3 square root 5 over 6 square root 25. I'm going to simplify this square root of 25, so I'm going to have 3 square root 5 over 6 times 5. I then have 3 square root 5. 6 times 5 is 30. I'm going to see if I can simplify 3 and 30, and I can. They both have 3 in common. So it's going to be the square root of 5 over 10. Last question is, I have the square root of 24 over 25. I cannot simplify these on the inside, so I'm going to take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. Square root of 24 I can break down, so I know that I could take out the greatest perfect square value I can take out is 4. So I did 4 times the square root of 6 over square root of 25 is 5. So I would be left with 2 square root 6 over 5. I'm going to look at the 2 and 5 and see if I can simplify. I cannot, so I'm going to leave that as my final answer.